Everyone, this is the Custoda, Aaron, and in this video, we're finally going to get to it. I know I've talked about it for a couple of videos, but we're finally going to start talking about how do we make events work between our master and detail. It's been a long time coming. We did some side tracks, go through and teach you how to refactor and update your NuGet packages, but we're finally there. So this is video 5. And a reminder, what you want to definitely do is go to GitHub and download the latest version of this source code, which will magically pop up on the screen here. You definitely want to go grab that and get the latest version of that code and make sure you're in video 5 under Prism Training. This is where I have it downloaded, and you'll want to be in the start videos if you want to type along with it. And if you want to see the final solution, you'll just go to the end video folder for video 5, and that will have the complete solution done. So we're going to go right and get right off to it. So how do we do this? Well, I explained last video, we added some models inside of here for our data that we're going to display. We had a repository that we're going to reuse to go through and get stuff. So in our view model, we kind of have to get things set up in a way that we can get data out. So we want to set up the repository in a way that we can get that information. And that's done in Unity. And that's a really interesting thing then. So we want our repository to be a singleton. In the sense, we don't want it to live in memory every single time we need it. We don't want all this stuff spun up. Instead, really, the quotes, for example, here should just come in once and then they're in memory. And that's a caching technique. And so we could do that. We could set up Unity, which is our IOC container. So anytime we want a repository, we can go grab it. Now, we have to do that in both Android and iOS. And I know we don't do a lot of testing in Android right now just because it's easier for you to split up the iOS stuff. But our app should also work in Android. And we want to do that in both. In Android, we do it in the main activity CS. And in iOS, we do it in the app delegate. So start with iOS first. Let's go ahead and get our repository set up. Well, this is pretty easy. Doesn't require a lot of work. The syntax, I'm just going to cut and paste in here so you can kind of see it. This is our syntax. And let me go ahead and do a quick fix and tell it to use our proper namespacing. And that should add it in a line right here for our Xamarin Form stuff. And we should probably clean this up so that the iOS stuff is together. I feel a little bit better about that. That doesn't look so bad. And let's go look and see what we did. So the container gets passed into our iOS initializer. And this is what we did in video 1 and 2, where we kind of set up a Prism to go ahead and work. And when we pass in the container, the Unity container, we have the ability to add stuff to the Unity container. And so this is, we're going to register an instance of the quote repository. We're just going to make a new one of those. And all this does now is it registers the quote repository as a singleton into the Unity container. So now any object that I want to be able to view model, for example, that I want to be able to use this repository, all I have to do is pass it into the signature, and Unity is going to go find that singleton, and then it's going to put it into memory and bring it over to that model, that object for us, which is really cool. And believe it or not, that's it. It's one-liner. And we're going to go ahead and say save there, and that should be it. And over here, it's the same thing. Let's go ahead and get that line of code and copy and paste it again. It should be the same line of code. And we can see here we got some namespace issues, so let's go ahead and quick fix those. Looks like we also have not been through here and fixed recently because we've got all kinds of things that it's really mad about. So let's go ahead and fix those too. And that should get us to the point where we're okay. I'm going to just reorder some of these namespaces so that I feel better about things. I am a stickler about what order my namespaces are in. Just makes me feel better. It makes me able to sleep at night. And so all I really did was go through and make sure that using the fix option that we had Prism Unity, and obviously practices Unity. These allow us to use Unity. I added our container, our quote repository, and that should all it takes in order to make all this stuff work. So let's go ahead and save that, and we're done. So now let's go into our master page view model for quotes. And this guy right here. And what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to pass in our quote repository. And that's the what we're going to do in order to be able to get those quotes. So let's make a new line here. And we're going to add another line to the signature of our view model. And so that's going to be a quote repository. Repository and quote repository. And that's spelled. Quick fix this, see if this works. I have it spelled wrong. Or that, or IntelliSense is broken in Visual Studio again. Let's just paste this in and see. There we go. I had it spelled wrong. There we go. And we'll want to get a local version of that thing that we can use. Oh, I forgot a comma there. So we want to definitely keep a local version of it in memory. So we're going to say a private read-only, and we want to call it a quote repository. So let's just copy this line from here, bring it up here, and we'll do the underscore because I like to, my underscore variables is a syntax I do for saying that it's a local variable, and I can look at any underscore variable then and know instantly, oh, that's a local variable, versus one that was created in the method, versus one that's a public variable or property. So we call those in C#. We're not in Java anymore. So all we have to do now is just say here our quote repository equals quote repository. And now we have a local reference to that variable, which is cool. So we want to be able to go grab and store these random quotes we want to show on the screen. And want to store those in a way that we can observe those so that if we bind against them, if they change, for example, that our view model updates our view automatically. And so anybody that's done this for a while knows that that's something called an observable collection. And what we want to do is make a private variable of type observable collection of quotes that we have from our repository. And so again, we're going to have to do quick fix, and we're going to have to tell it to use both our models and the reference to the object model from Microsoft, who made the this pattern available. And so we're using the observable collection. Now we have a private, and now we need a public also. Our public should just reference our private. And I'll show you a syntax for this also. There's a couple different ways you could do this. This syntax, I'm doing it by hand right now, but there's another way that you can do this. So if we take a look here, we've just made a public property for the random quotes observable collection and the set property. This is what all the magic happens with bindings. In the set property method, this is using the notified change, and that sets an event so that anytime this happens, anytime this changes for any reason, an event gets fired, and that's how your UI gets notified. Basically, it's via an event, and that's how this whole crazy method, this technology works. This concept of bindings of view models of views and letting the view dynamically know when that happens. Now, if you're trying to make a public property that you want to be able to have observable and stuff like that, Prism did set up a syntax for that, and it's called the pprop, I want to say. Prop P, I want to say. And if we double tab that, you see here, it gets a little gummy, so I think there might be a bug in this, but let's try doing this way away from our constructor, so we'll make sure that that's the case. But if we do a pprop, or prop P, this is supposed to make a public property, and you can see here that it's still getting screwy up for some reason. But this does work. This must just be a bug in the version I'm using. But pprop normally will give you a syntax for that, and that may work in Visual Studio better for you than it's working for me here. But that is a way that dynamically generates that, and then you can just rename it, use a rename function to rename it. It can save you some typing. There are some other code little snippets there you can use, but this seems to be good for right now. So now that we have our random quote, basically, we want to be able to say, hey, let's go ahead and get those, right? We want to set up our model for that. So, you know, we could do that either in a method, or we could just do it right here in the constructor. I'm not a fan of getting the constructor too dirty, so let's just make a private method do that. Get random quotes. And we'll just make a method on the fly here to do that for us. And let's go to quick fix and tell it to generate a method for us. And this is very Visual Studio kind of thing to do here. You see I have some random bugs where the brackets, when I do the automated stuff, are getting moved around and stuff. That just seems to be part of Xamarin Studio. I've kind of got to get used to it. So what we should be able to do is to say our random quotes that we have. We made this collection of up here of observable collection of these things. what we want to do is we want to say that guy is going to equal a new set of this observable collection. So observable collection. Now what are we going to pass? Oh, we want a generic because it is a quote. Sorry. So that fills that requirement because that's what random quotes is. Now we need to pass it in some stuff. And one thing we could pass it is a collection of these. Well, we have that repository. And it turns out that repository does have a method in there that we can get quotes from. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say quotes repository dot get random quotes. And there's our method. And it doesn't take anything in, and it returns a list of quotes. And that should be all it takes for our collection to go ahead and get a bunch of random quotes and put into it. And I think that that's enough to get us started. Now, what we do also want to be able to do, though, we talked about this earlier, is we want the event concept, right? And so in order to do an event, we might as well just go ahead and get that stubbed up now, and then we'll fix it later. You know, we'll fix what it means later. So an event inside of Prism and inside of doing this view model kind of stuff where we pass information back and forth is done via command, and so a delegate command to be more exact. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring up. You can see here Prism's got a built-in delegate command built into it. It is a generic. And so we have an observable collection of quotes. So what we want to be able to do is when somebody in our list view clicks on one of those quotes, we want to send a command to this view model that says, hey, this particular quote was clicked. And then we could use that to grab some information out about that quote and send it over to our, in our view model, send it over to our detail and say, hey, here's the guy that was clicked or gal, and do something with that information. You know, we could use this basically to get the entire object that was clicked on and use it to build a message or an event to send over and do some messaging. And so that's kind of what we're kind of hoping to do here. So the syntax for this is pretty easy. We just need to make a new delegate, and when we make our new delegate, we need to attach it to a method that will run when this happens. So what we're going to do is say item clicked equals new, lowercase new delegate command of type quote, and then now we need there's two ways you can do the syntax. You can either do it inside of the constructor as a lambda event. I'm not a fan of that. I like the option of just making an event. That way my constructor is not this big, humongous guy that's, you know, many lines long, that's hard to get. So we're going to do item clicked. Or what's actually, instead of item, let's do quote clicked. So we have some descriptive way to say that that's what was clicked. And of course, we don't have a method for this yet. So we're going to quick fix this and tell it to generate one for us. And we'll just take it wherever it puts it. And we can see here, it made a method for us. I like to put private in front of it. I know it's not needed, but that's me. I just like it. And we'll change this quote reference instead of object to that. And we'll handle that, what we want to do about that later. For right now, I think we have enough where we can get ourselves started. We could maybe throw in a console write line there to see whether or not the item's been clicked, and maybe that's a good idea. Now I think about it, just so for debugging this we could see. So let's do a debug write line, and let's just do a string here that says quote clicked, and we'll say quote dot author value dot full name, and then we'll say quote dot text. And that way we know what quote was clicked when this happens. So we do need system diagnostics to use the debug framework. So using system dot capital system dot diagnostics, and that way we can use debug write line. And that'll come up in our console then when we'll go ahead and debug this. So we've got something up that we can start getting our master to the point where we can listen and get an event when that kind of happens, which is really cool. Prism has, like I said, this really cool command way of communicating between the view and view model. There's something else called action, and that's how you can map the view model to an event that happens in the view, but we're not going to talk about those right now. For right now, let's just go ahead and just do the delegate command. So next thing, we've got our view model, I think, up to the point where we can start writing some code in our view in order to take advantage of all this, these new repository of quotes that we've pulled down in our observable collection. So let's go take a look at our master page view. We've got this guy here, so let's open up him, and then let's go open up over here and make sure we got both these pieces of code open. So right now we're just binding to a label, and that seems like it worked for us. But what's it would be kind of nice if we had a real UI, wouldn't it? So let's start with some padding on our content page. What we definitely want to do is have some padding because the status bar is 20 pixels down. Right now we're using a stack layout to do that, but that's not really the right way to do it. What we really should be doing is doing this syntax right here. Let's go ahead and indent that so that it makes a little bit more sense. So we're going to say that for the content page, we got some padding. And on platform, iOS specifically, because we know the stats bar is up there, we're going to add a padding on the top of 20 pixels. And so how this reads is it's just like CSS. So if you've ever done web page, you're going to be fine. It's left first, then top, then right, then bottom. And there's also a shorthand. If you want both these to be the same, you can just say left and right, and then top and bottom. So you only have to give it 2 numbers if you want. That's from CSS. It's a very common syntax for these particular numbers where you're talking about a rectangle shape, which is what we're talking about here for your content page. Your content page is a rectangle on the screen. And so when we start talking about that, that's what that means. So let's add in some stuff here. So to our content page. So content page.content. Let's go ahead and add some content. So the one thing we want to make is a list view. So let's make a list view here. And our list view, like I said, I'd like to have some indentation here in my stuff because there's no text wrapping inside of this editor, which I really hate. And so because I tend to do this a lot so that I can read it easier. Item source. So we're basically naming it. When we name something in Xamarin Forms, what that means is that that's a local variable name that we can access in our code behind. And so if you don't have an X name, and X, just so you know, comes right here. That's this reference right here. We're saying that, hey, if you use X, this is the class that we're going to use and bind this information to. So you can see here, we're naming a variable LV quotes. Now, since this is a local variable, you could do it like that too. That's perfectly legal. It's up to you. I'm just going to use without it. That's kind of the note that tells me, oh, I didn't make it in the code behind. I made it in the XAML. And now, see our item source here? This is where we could bind to the stuff that we set up in our view model. And if we think about this, if we go back to our view model, we had something called random quotes. And so I'm just going to copy that name out because I want to make sure I spell it right. And I'm just going to say bracket, the squiggly bracket, binding, and I'm going to bind to the random quotes. That's now our data source. Whatever's inside of there, we're going to be able to use that. That's pretty slick. Now, our quotes have different text sizes. So here's one of my tips. If you have cells that you want to have the information grow and shrink so that every cell is the same size, or every row inside of our table view, list view. I'm an iOS developer, so I always call them, you had table views. Obviously in Android and in Forms, it's called a list view. It means the same thing, so I apologize for that. Inside of our list view, if our rows or our cells basically have different text of different sizes and stuff like that, we want the cell to grow and shrink based on that text size. So how we do that is there's a property we can set that says has uneven rows, and we're going to say true on that. And what this will do is this will make it so that the list view will draw and basically calculate the size of those dynamically. So let's go ahead and close our list view. And that will keep our little red squiggly line guy from coming up. So now what do we need? Well, we need to tell our list view we have a template, an item template of what we want to draw. And so to do that, we have a property on the list view called the item template. And there it is, our second guy or gal. We'll go ahead and make that pop up. And now we're going to tab in. And so inside of an item template, we have something called a data template. So let's go ahead and make a data template. And from inside of a data template, we have a view cell. And our view cell is that cell I was telling you about. So the view cell has something on it called a view. So we need to kind of go in and make a view. And I promise we're eventually going to be able to actually write some actual code that renders something. We're currently in XML hell, where we're basically just going through and trying to build a bunch of XML to do some stuff. So basically what we have, like I said, to make sure we're I'm going faster, want to make sure we can understand what we're doing here. We're making a list view. We're making a local variable called LV quotes that's going to be inside of our code behind that we can use. Item source, That syntax right there is a binding. And what that means is that we have a view model bound up right here. We have this Prism command that says view model locator, auto wire view model true. And that's going to use our settings that we did in app CS. If we remember back here, we have this app XAML CS where we're kind of binding our view models to our views. That's going to allow us to basically say, oh, okay, anything in the view model that's bindable, we're going to be able to use in a binding statement. So here we bound the title in the last video. That was a string. And this one we're going to bind the actual observable collection of random quotes to the item source. And we have a property in here called has uneven rows so that our quotes have different texts of different sizes. One quote may be 1 line and one quote may be 5 lines. So we want to make sure that we display the entire lines and we don't get the little ellipsis that says that, we can't show all the text. I don't like that. I want to see all the text. So now let's go ahead and draw what we got. And so how we're going to do that, we're going to start with a good old stack layout. I'm a big fan of the stack layout. iOS has one of these. It's starting in iOS 9 and higher, and it's pretty slick. Apple recommends using it. So I'm going to start the stack layout with a padding of 10 on the left and 10 on the right. And my first stack layout, I'm going to make an image show up. Because we're going to have an image of the author on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side of our cell, we're going to have both the quote and then underneath that, the author. I do want some padding in between the picture of the, obviously the left side of the screen, about 10 pixels. I also want padding between the picture and the actual text that's going to come up. So that's where our padding's coming in. Horizontally, since this is going to be the picture as our first guy here, we're going to do a center here. And we'll also do that for vertical. Vertical options equals center. And let's go ahead and do our orientation, excuse me. We'll set that to horizontal. So there's our very first stack layout. And now we want to do an image. And our image is going to have some stuff in it. We have a source. The image source is going to be where do we want to get the image from. And of course, we got that binding stuff, which is really kind of slick. So I want to definitely do a binding to that. Now, inside of the author model, I have a URL that as the picture, the location of the picture on the internet from Wikipedia. So that's what we're going to use here. If we take a look at the author class real quick, we have a picture URL. We're going to basically call that, we'll bind to it, and that's what's going to get us the actual URL to that. Now, we have a observable collection of quotes. So if we go look at a quote, what does a quote have? A quote has an author value. The author value is where that author is. So we need to bind to that first. So we're going to say author value. And this is where there's not a lot of IntelliSense for this. So you have to type this in right. I will tell you a secret. A lot of times I don't, I'm not the world's best typer. I type wrong all the time. So I'll open up the class and I'll literally copy the name out from here and then paste it in just to validate, I typed it in right because there's no IntelliSense right now. Like once again, in Visual Studio, the IntelliSense is 1,000 times better. And so this isn't necessarily as big of an issue as it is in Xamarin Studio. So we're going to do a height request. And we're going to say that we want the image to be 48 pixels. And we're going to do the same thing with the width request. We're going to say here, we're going to say 48. And we're also going to do a minimum on these guys. And so that way we're going to try to hard code this so that it doesn't make this any bigger than that. So we're going to use the word minimum here. And, well, that just got away from me now, didn't it? Minimum height request. Let's go ahead and do this, paste it in, and instead we're going to take the word width out, so I don't like typing. We'll paste it in here, and there's our minimum width request. And close our image tag, and that is our image right there. So now what we need though is we do need a stack layout to handle our text, because we want to stack some text together of both our quote and our author. So let me find the right line here, tab over. And now what we want to do is make another stack layout. We want to make a new stack layout. So this is going to be where our author quotes are, basically. And, we should probably add some padding. So let's keep the tag open for a while here, add some padding. I'm trying to think here. What do I want? Maybe 20 pixels on the left and right, and then another 10. Although we already have 10 there coming from the padding of the image, so maybe a 10 would be fine. Let's try 10, and then let's try 10 for the height. So actually, we could just do this, and that'd be all four corners. How does that sound? Orientation. Our orientation is definitely going to be vertical because we have two pieces of text we want to stack on top of each other, the quote first and then the author name. Horizontal options, we're going to say that we want to fill and expand. And these are a little bit tricky. You want to read, if you ever, Xamarin's documentation is pretty good on that explains these things. I highly recommend understanding the difference between start and expand. A lot of times you're looking, if it looks goofy, it's probably because you didn't get the expand part right. You know, like center and expand versus center. And so definitely a tip, the Custoda tip, is to check that out. So we're going to make two labels. We're going to make a label of the quote and a label of the actual author's name. And so let's go to binding. We're going to bind the text of this label to the text of the quote. And that should get us there. And now we want to set some options here for word wrapping and that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and say line break mode equals word wrap. And that's going to make it so that our text is going to dynamically grow. Now, when we have a dynamically growing text, we want to definitely set our horizontal vertical options so it understands, you know, how do we grow this thing. So we're going to say horizontal options equals start and expand. And we're going to say our vertical options are also going to be start and expand. And that way we're going to try to use as much space as we can. And we could leave the text style alone, but I'm a big fan of using text styles. The text styles are important. You want to definitely look at the options for these, and the Xamarin has some really great documentation that explains this. The device styles, they're called. And so if you Google device styles, I'll do a separate video on this. They're device styles that basically will dynamically take the text size up and down based on the settings on your phone. So people that are visually impaired, they may need the font a little bit bigger. So they go into the phone settings and they crank up their font so it's bigger. But the problem is your app by default won't know that. Now, if you use the dynamic type styles that you can see here, I'm using, it's called the title style. If they do jack that font up and make it bigger, your label will actually grow with that. And that's really cool. We like that because we want to be nice to people that maybe are using a phone but don't have the greatest vision anymore in the world. And guess what? You're going to get old eventually too. I'm getting old, and I already having problems sometimes seeing stuff and having to, jack up the font on my web browser, for example. I remember the days when I used to have these really big monitors and I'd have the smallest text in the world. Those days are over for me. So we want to play nice to those people when we can. So use dynamic, research this and understand what those are and use those because it's really important. I think to support all users, not just a subset of users. And the same thing goes for colors. Understand how color blindness works, and don't assume in your application that you're going to have a bunch of people that understand what the color red is, for example, because that's a color of, if you're colorblind, that is not the case. People aren't always going to see that color the same way. Greens and blues. I mean, go read about this and understand that if you're building apps and you don't have a designer, you really owe it to yourself to understand how these things work. So we've got a view here. By theorem, we've got a bunch of stuff bound up to it, and everything looks pretty cool. We should be able to just run this thing and see if we can get some text to show up. I think that's a good idea, and see where we kind of sit. Then, of course, what we'll do here is we'll finish it up by being able to click on one of these items and go ahead and call an event to happen. And so let's see here. We'll go to our author quotes, and oh, look at that! We've got a bunch of author quotes. We didn't do all that much work, and cool. We've got these different author quotes. Now, of course, we click on something and nothing happens right now because we didn't wire any of our events, but we're half there. And let's go ahead and just I'm so excited. Let's go ahead and rotate left and show what happens when that happens with our master detail view. This is great. This is exactly the UI I was looking for. I wanted to basically say on the left here, I can click on one of these. Now, what we want to come happen over here is we want these author quotes to show up over here. We clicked on something, but nothing's happened. So let's start making that happen. Let's start the magic of that and see if we can, where we can't get with this. So there's a couple different ways we could do this. There is a binding event here that you can do this on. So item selected, and that raises an event. Now the problem is that a command is not necessarily an event. We're going to run into some problems there, and that is there's a couple different ways we can fix this. I want to show you a dirty trick, and there's a plugin, NuGet package called Behaviors. I'm going to do a separate video that explains that and how to make commands work with events. But for right now, I'm going to show you a dirty trick that gets around this without having to go through that, because we still got a lot of work to do from a sense of getting our stuff set up over there yonder on our detail view. And so let's kind of go through and say, well, what do we need to do? Well, I would like to say that we want to be able to talk to the view model here. And it turns out you can, and most people don't know that in Prism. That's called the binding context. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a public property because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to type this thing in 1,000 times. I'm going to actually just copy the name here and say view model. And I'm going to call this our view model. And people that have used MVM Cross will know that usually the MVM Cross people give you this property for free, so that if you're doing code behind, that you can access it. And I really wish that Brian would do that, because I get that a lot of people like XAML, but for me, there's just times where that isn't always going to be the case. And so instead, I do this trick, binding context as one of these view models. So what happens here is anytime I want to use that view model and get access to it, and all of its events and all of its commands and stuff, I can just call the view model and I get that. Otherwise, I'd have to typecast every time I need it, and I'm lazy. I don't want to have to do that 1,000 times. So this is just going to save us some typing. So inside of here, we want to be able to do a couple different things. We want to be able to set up that event so that when something clicks, that we do something. So instead of our try statement, after we initialize components, so this is after our XAMLs ran and set its all stuff up and good and all that stuff, we want to run an event that basically we're just going to, on the side here, do this for right now. Like I said, in the future video, we'll fix this. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell LV quotes. Now remember, we did that X colon name in our list view. That makes it so that's a variable over here that we can talk to. And remember I showed you there was that item selected event? Well, we can answer that event here. And so we're going to do a lambda expression. Like I said, I don't recommend always doing this because it makes your constructor dirty. But just for right now, we're just going to do that just to get something quick and easy. So the very first thing is that when we get one of these item selected events, we should be able to get a quote out of it. But we want to make sure that we do that. We can check to make sure that that's what really happened before we typecast this. And this is just good coding, if you ask me. It's making sure that you didn't make a mistake. And by doing that, you're less likelihood to get a crash. Because when you start typecasting, bad things can happen unless you make sure that you truly know what you're doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and see if the selected item we have is a quote. And if it is a quote, then we'll typecast a variable out to it. And this is defensive coding. So we can say var quote equals e.selected item as quote. And now we have a quote, that variable. And we can now call the view model. And remember we made that command earlier on the view model? That was this item clicked. We can call that thing. Well, how do we call it via code? Well, we just tell the view model that we made the local variable up here, or public property, excuse me, that we can access now. We can tell its item click, that's that delegate that we created, that delegate command we called it. And we can just say execute, and then we can send it our quote. And what that does is that's going to run that command for us, the execute command. And since that public property, this guy right here, was of type quote, that's what we pass in. Because if we take a look, we map that delegate command to this method called do quote clicked, and then we pass in a quote. So we have to make sure in here that we're also passing in of type quote. That's all it takes. By theory, now our view model should get a message of this, and we should be able to go through and see that. So let's go ahead and put a little breakpoint here and see if we click on these, if we can get one of those to pop up. And that's going to be half the battle then. We're going to talk between our view model and our view, tell the guy, hey, anytime this list view happens, send a message out to our view model that somebody got selected, and then we could send a message over to the other side of the screen and have it do some stuff. So there we go. We've got our event. So let's go ahead and just take a look at what quote is. And one of the easier ways to do that is do something called a watch. If you've been programming for a long time, you'll know that you can just type in the variable name here. You can see the values of it. So we can see the text. There's our text, and that seems right. We can hit this little I guy right here, and it'll show you the text. And if we make the author bigger, we can see that this is Benjamin Franklin. And let's go ahead and check here, and that's who I clicked on first. And that makes total sense. Now, I told you that this also can come up in the application log, and we can see that over down here. There should be an output option that we can see, application output right here. You see here, here's the quote. So let's change it up. Let's go ahead and find Steve Jobs and click on him, and what we should be able to do, we'll take our breakpoint out, hit our continue, and look at our application output, and we'll see that there's our second line, Steve Jobs. Exactly. So we're getting the information we're looking for, right? And now we have a bigger problem, though. We want to be able to tell the view model, hey, send a message that tells our person over on the right-hand side to draw based on this. And so let's set up the messaging, I think, in this video, and then we'll break off the video, and then we'll do another video where we draw some stuff on the right-hand side of the screen. We don't want to try to make these videos too long. Let's see if we can get at least messaging working. So for this, we're going to need a message class, right? That totally makes sense. We want to be able to send a message. So let's make a new file here. In our message type, we're just going to make a generic class, and what we're going to call this is we selected a quote, right? So let's call this a quote navigation message, because we want to navigate based on a quote, an author quote. Let's actually say this is an author quote, because it is an author quote. Author quote navigation message. And so what we want to do is have a class that we can send some information about what was just selected. Now, there's a couple different things we could send in the message. We can send anything we want, quite honestly. It's only up to our imagination. So what we do have in the author is an int. And that's usually really popular, is that, hey, you know, we have a key to a value in a database, and that's going to be the author ID. So what we could do is we could say public int author ID, and we could just say get and set. And what this would do is that our message will take it at author ID, and then based on the author ID, our detail can dig that out and do something with it. Now, we could send the entire quote over there if we wanted to. And this just comes down to a caching strategy. How do you want your application to work? Do you want to basically send just the ID over there and cause the other side to do a pull, either from a local cache like our repository or from a web service? Well, I can't answer you on the design of that. That's up to you to figure out in your application. However, for ours, right now we're using int. However, we'll do another example where we send a full object into a message. It really doesn't matter if it's an int or an object. The biggest deal with, obviously, if it's an object, we're adding a reference counter before we can get rid of it in the garbage collector. The more reference counters, the longer it takes before it could be collected. In mobile phones, we do care about performance, so that could be an issue long run. But I mean, we're splitting hairs at this point in time, and I think either an object or this is perfectly fine, and unless it's like a humongous, like, you know, very large list of crap, I don't think that you're gonna have a problem with this. So let's take our debug statement out here, and let's make a message. Now we have one more thing we kind of need in order to make all this work. We're gonna need an event that we can send our message out with. So let's start just doing our basically our dream of being able to go through and just have a message and send it out. So let's say var message equals one of those new things that we just created, those author quotes. So we're going to say author quote navigation message. And we're going to go ahead and say that the author ID equals quote author value ID. and semicolon, close this, and there. Now the problem is we need to fix our namespace issue because it doesn't know what one of those are. But once we do that and fix our namespace, that should work. Oh, we should put the word new in front of it. That also helps. And oh, we don't need that because we're just doing a auto constructor, setting a property without having to call the constructor. So we've got a message, but now we need to be able to send that message to an event. So MVVM Cross has built in something called a pub sub event. They're really cool. I like them a lot. It makes total sense. I'm always going to say it 1,000 times over how great I think Prism is, because I really do, and Brian's done a great job making all this kind of stuff work. So in Prism, he doesn't have a template for this, but this syntax is so simple, you really don't need one. So what we want to do is we have this author quote navigation message. So let's make an author quote navigation event. So we want to make an event basically at any time. We could either call it a navigation event, or we could call it a selection. I'm going to call it a navigation event because I want to send over to the detail to do something once it gets this thing. I want to be able to say, hey, you need to draw yourself differently or do something with yourself now that you have this information available. So let's go ahead and just call it that instead. And inside of our event, we're going to go through and we need to make a using statement over to the Prism library that supports this, and that's Prism events. And once we do that, we can just inherit from the class that Brian has given us, which is called the pub sub event. I talked about that earlier. Inside of it, we just want to say what our payload is. And our payload is a generic, and well, we have that. That's going to be our message that we just created. So we're going to call this a author quote navigation message. And that's what we want to kind of send anytime one of these things happens. So let's go ahead and fix our namespace. And now we have an event. Wow, that was pretty easy. What? I mean, is there more to it? No, that's it. And that's why this is so great. You don't have to worry about necessarily all the memory management code it takes to make events work and stuff. Brian has simplified all that out, part of Prism. I really love this concept of making messages and making events this way. So now all we should have to do is subscribe to our event and send it off onto the wire. Now, in order to do that, we have a problem though. We need to be able to get events, and that is means that we need an object to do that with. Well, that comes built into Prism, and you don't have to set that up into Unity. Brian's excuse me, Brian. He's the guy that wrote Prism. Prism has some interfaces that he auto ejects in, and so one of those interfaces he auto ejects is called the iEvent Aggregator. And so it's I'm gonna not try to kill myself in typing this. I'm just gonna paste this in from a code snippet I have, and I'm gonna go ahead and do a quick fix to get the namespace for this. And it's in Prism Events, just like we used earlier here. And I'm gonna cut this out and make it up here so all the Prism stuff's together, so our code looks nice and neat. And what we want to do is we want to be able to keep a local variable to this so that we can use it in our method. So let's up here where we have our private read-only, let's make another one of those private read-onlys. And let's call this that, and we'll add a little underscore guy to that so that we know that that's a private local. And let's go events aggregator equals events aggregator. Well, now we're copying that reference to that variable, that private variable that we want to use. And so this is where now we can use that event aggregator to make our messaging work. So what we can say here is event aggregator, and we want to get that event. And the event's the one that we just created. So that's that author quote navigation, and we called it an event. So we're going to do that. Now we have to go through and fix our namespace. Tell it to use that. Now, once we got that event, we want to be able to publish to that event our message. And so if we do the period and we look for something that looks like we could do that, there it is, publish. Well, that's pretty easy. And then on top of that, it knows our event type, so it knows what it takes in. The publish message takes in a payload of a type author quote navigation message. Okay, we can do that. We've got that message. We just created it. So let's just pass that in. That's it. That's all it takes to do events in Prism. That is pretty awesome. Basically, we just make an event in a message class. We set up our generics so that we understand, what is it that in the event that we want to pass through, our type of message. And then we get the event aggregator, and then we basically just send whatever event we want to send onto the messaging framework, and we're done. We just publish it, and that's it. Now, this is only half of it. The problem is that we need somebody to listen and do something with that. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. Listening on phone versus listening on tablet is going to be a different thing. Because if we think about it, on the phone, we just have a navigation controller. We don't have the master detail. So this isn't going to work when we go to phone. So we should probably fix that real quick. So this theory of sending events is going to work in tablet, but since we only have a navigation controller, we could probably simplify this quite a bit if we have a phone. So let's do that. Let's put an if statement in here and make sure that we don't break phone as part of our awesome message thing that we're doing. So we're going to say if device, and now of course device is not available unless we use Xamarin Forms. So using Xamarin.forms namespace, and that should give us the ability to use device. And we're going to use our idioms awesome. And idioms is our piece of hardware that we're using, and also the type of operating system. All this stuff's under the device class. And so what we're looking for is phone. If we have a phone, we're going to want to do things a certain way, and else we're going to do it this way, which is our tablet and desktop way. And so the idioms that are available are phone, tablet, desktop, and then unsupported. For right now, we're just going to say if we're on phone, let's talk about building some navigation parameters. So in Prism, we have navigation. And so if we don't do this event system, we do have the ability to make some navigation parameters. So we're going to want to do that. We want to send in the author ID that we just did in our message, but we want to do that in a parameter. So how we do that is we just make a parameters variable. Parameter equals new navigation parameter. And there's a couple different ways we can make a parameter. So one way we could do it is we could just build a string. And that's really popular. Brian, I'll put a link up to the video that he did on Channel 9 where he talks about this in great details, where you could just use string parameters. And so I think the first one we'll do is we'll just do that. We'll do an ID equals. And since this is a string concatenation, now we can just say our quote dot author value dot ID quote, my cursor, try to get this to end of line here, close our variable, close our string, and close our method. And now we have a parameter. So that's one way you can make a parameter. The other way is you can make a new parameter collection, and you can pass in the parameters with full objects. Obviously, this is just a string parameter, but the object supports both. And so it's up to you to decide which one you want to use for this. We'll do future examples where we do full objects. For right now, let's just start with simple string parameter we'll send in, and we'll have to obviously dig that out. And so finally, the thing we want to do is we want to await the navigation service. And we have a navigation service. Do we have a navigation? Oh, wait. That's probably part of our base. Navigation. Have I set that up yet? I don't think I've set that up yet. So we're passing in to base our navigation service. So let's go look at our base view model and see if we have that. So here it is, protected read only, and we have an underscore navigation service. And we set it here, so that should be available in all of our view models. So let's go look at our view model here that we were just in and see whether or not we can get navigation service. There it is. And what we want to say is we want to navigate to something async. And what we want to navigate to is a string. Now, of course, it's an async method, so we're going to need to do await. When we need to do await, we need to put async up here. It's going to go cranky because of the fact it doesn't want to do that in a void method, but we're just going to let it do that. And so now we just have to give it the page we want to navigate to. Well, the page we want to navigate to is called the quote detail page view. So quote detail page view. That's where we do want to route to. And we're going to pass it our parameters that we have just made. And that's going to be able to navigate there if we're on a phone. So if we're just taking care of phone, now phone, we have some events on our view model that we need to handle in order to receive that parameter and deal with it. We'll talk about that in a second here. But that set us up for both phone and and the tablet. Now we need somebody to listen to that event, and I think that that's where we're gonna end this video. Is we'll basically validate that the details get in the event, and we'll validate that the master detail page is getting the event, and if we can validate that, then we'll work on getting the UI working with that information in the next video. So let's go ahead and save here. Now, one thing we want to do is we can go ahead and check this, make sure we didn't break anything. We need to add a lot of code in, um, and we don't want to get to the point where we're getting too far along, and then it's going to get really hard to debug. So let's just do a sanity check here, make sure that we didn't break anything, nothing's blown up in the universe. Yeah, technically speaking, we could send an event, and if nobody's listening, nobody's listening. And so we're just clicking here and nothing's happening. So that's okay. Just want to make sure that we didn't type any typos or break anything. So let's go ahead and end this video by setting up two things. So one, for phone, we need to go into the view model of the detail page. So we have right here our quote detail page view model. And there's an event that we're going to want to listen to that we have on our that we put in our base class. So if we look at our base classes, remember I told you a couple of videos back that we wanted to take a newer version of Prism because some core navigation stuff changed, and we wanted to be able to take advantage of that. See, on navigated from, on navigated to, and on navigating to. These are virtual methods that we kind of are getting for free as part of Prism. Well, the one that we're really interested in is this one right here, on navigating to. We want to override that. We want to take those parameters and check for our author int that we're passing in. So we could do that here. Over here on our author detail page, what we're going to want to say is we want to override, and we're going to get a list of those, and we want to say on navigating to. And so we don't need to call the base on this. What we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, if the navigation parameters are not null, if parameters are not equal to null, and so we have a key that we're looking for inside those parameters, and that's that ID that we set. So we're going to say if parameters contains key, and our key we're looking for is called ID. If it contains ID, let's go ahead and get that parameter out. So let's say parameters dot I think we could just call this with an array, if I remember right. Yep. So just give it our key. And I think we want to be able to typecast this, if I remember right. Let me look at my notes here real quick. I want to say that we could typecast this out and just get it that way. And then once we get it out that way, we're good to go. So let me just look at my notes and see if that's what I did. Oh, no, I didn't. That's right. Okay. Well, yes and no. So the problem is that we want to convert that variable to an int, right? And so one of the problems we could have is a null value. And so what we probably want to do is this. We probably want to make it ID and make it equal to -1. Okay, that's going to be our default value we're coming in. We know the ID should be greater than 0. So now what we want to do is we want to try parsing out the ID, which is an integer, from the parameters array. So what we're going to say is did parse, and that's going to be a Boolean, and it's going to be int.try parse. And how try parsing works is that we can pass it a string and try to get an int out of it, and that Boolean will be true or false based on this. So what we're going to do is we're passing in our parameters ID, and this is really protective code, toString, and we're going to out our ID. And that is a very tricky line of code. The out statement is a reference, basically. So we're saying, hey, we're passing in an int, and we're going to pass it into a variable, but we're passing a reference to it. So whatever value that gets set to that ID will still be there. Because remember, ints are, they're not objects inside of C#. They're struct, to be honest. So that's the out statement's going to get basically pass that reference. So now what we could do is we could say, hey, if did parse, because we want to make sure that the parsing worked, and if the ID is greater than -1. We should have an author. So then what we can just do is debug this. So we'll just debug right line for right now, and we'll say the author ID that came in is ID. That should work. Now let's go ahead and quick fix this and use system diagnostics. so that we can use that. And that should work on phone. We should be able to now go through and see, hey, did we get an ID coming in? Now, we could reuse this code for also our messaging system. Well, how do we do that? Well, remember I told you that the brains behind a master detail is the master detail page view. That's what kind of controls all of the stuff for tablet only. And if you remember right, we kind of set the master inside of that master page detail page view, and we then told it to navigate to the view model. So let's go ahead and look up that and see right here we have our quote master detail page view model. This has got the navigation service in it, and this also has all the logic of how we want to be able to, when we want to navigate on the master detail, we want to do it from inside of here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set up some abilities to do that. So first, we're going to need another reference. And so we're going to cheat a little bit. We need a reference. If you remember back here, we needed a reference to our event aggregator. We're going to need another reference to that. So I'm just going to copy this line of code so that I can paste it in and save myself some typing. So we definitely want the event aggregator. And we're going to go ahead and do a quick fix on this and say our namespaces are fixed. And then we want to make a private reference to this. So let's go ahead and say private read only. Same thing again, but underscore. Now we have a copy of that. We're going to say event aggregator equals event aggregator. So the last thing we want to do is we want to subscribe to the event. And so let's go and make a method that says subscribe events private void subscribe events. This is where we're going to use our event aggregator to go through and subscribe to those events. So the event that we want to subscribe to, if we think about it, was an event that we created. So we're going to call the event aggregator. We're going to say, hey, let's get the event. And if we remember right, that event was our author quote navigation event. Now, of course, it's not going to find that because we have a namespace issue. We're going to go to quick fix, tell it to find our event. But instead of publishing, we want to subscribe to it. So if we go look here, let's see if we can get a method to do that. So it's a call our method here and see. Oh, there's a subscribe. Cool. Now all we really need to do is pass it an event, like a method to listen to. So let's do that. Let's pass an event, and we're going to say do author quote navigation. And that's going to be there. And we're going to quick fix this to generate that method for us. And we'll just put it there. That sounds great. And now we have a method that any time that event happens, we're going to do it here. Well, if we think about it, what do we want to do? We really want to do the same thing we did in phone here. We want to be able to tell the navigation controller, which we have access to, hey, go and send an event to the detail and tell it to switch over, and here's the author ID, do some work. That kind of makes sense, right? So this becomes really pretty easy. We just want to send an event over to that to tell it to navigate to that thing and handle it. Okay, that's cool. So what we should be able to do now is tell the navigation service, we're going to have to make a parameter, right? Just like we did last time. So we're going to say var. In fact, we could probably just cut and paste this code out. No, that's not necessarily the best way to do this. We probably should refactor this eventually. But right here, we had the code to do that. And if we do it here, this should be what we want to do. If we think about it, the only difference now is that it's in the message. So instead of quote author ID value, what we're going to do is we're going to say message ID. And what was it called? I think it's called author ID. Yeah, instead of our message. There we go. And so that gets our message. And now we have this await, but we have a couple different issues. One, this is an async. So async. And that should do it. That should be able to send it. Now, one of the things we want to be able to do is tell the user when they don't have something selected to select an author on tablet only, right? And so what we probably need to do is make a view to actually handle that. And then what we want to do is when we actually have one selected, we'll draw it. We'll save that for the next video. For right now, all we want to be able to do is send a message over to that guy, no matter what, to basically see that we got the author ID. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. If we get it working, then like I said, we'll in the next video we'll go through and make the detail, pull the rest of the quotes for that author, and kind of wrap this particular lesson up. So if we go look here, it looks like we got a new event. That seems like it worked, but let's go ahead and look at our view model code and see if we can debug that to make sure that that's what we're really getting. Let's go to application output and see. So we can see here author ID that came in is 2. So let's change that out, and that's the second author. Let's go to here and see, and go to our application output. Let's keep that open. So let's hit this guy right here to keep it open. Where did it go now? Application output right here. So author came in 3. So let's go find the last guy, Nicholas Tesla, and there's 8. So we're getting the events, and that's coming from our detail view. If we go look at our detail view, that's our code that we wrote right here. So that's working. So let's go over to phone, make sure that phone's working too. And we'll call it a night. And like I said, tomorrow, I'll render out and record the video for getting the detail page working. We'll also add a no information, like no author's been selected kind of view, so that by default we route to that in our master page, our master detail view, so that we can tell people, hey, you don't have anything selected yet. And then once they do select it, we'll take that message in and do something with it. So we can see here in phone, we've got all of our different authors and quotes. Let's go ahead and just click our Steve Jobs, and we can see here we're now in author quotes. And we can see the message down here, author ID that came in is 4. So we know that our application output's also working. So there we go, folks. We've started events. We've got an event working. We've wired it up. We've got the pub sub working. We're sending information over to our other side. We've got some issues with it, though, that we need to fix. We want to add in a no detail. We also want to kind of spruce that up to take that ID in and make some UI with it and stuff. But we're halfway there. So I'm really excited to go through and get the next video up and running for you guys to show you the next part of this saga. And then after these videos, we're actually going to work on some stuff of showing you how to do scanning with Xamarin Forms and using tablet and all this good stuff with master detail. We're also going to do some camera stuff. I'll show you how to build up some stuff using some camera, be able to take pictures and do previews and stuff like that. It's got a lot of stuff planned. It's going to be great. Once again, thank you. Video's getting a little long, so I'm going to cut it out and look forward to you in the next video. Take care. Have a good one.